Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second event of the webinar series Residencies in Challenging Times. My name is Luigi Galimberti. I'm a board member of Artis, and I'm really happy to introduce this second event. This webinar series is organized as a collaboration of Artis, which is the largest arts residency network in the world, and IASPIS, which is a visual arts program or the Swedish art grant committee, and with the support of Creative Victoria. We're very grateful to our partners for the support, and we are very grateful to our members as well. So why are we here discussing residencies, and particularly discussing residencies in the current context? COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic had a substantial impact on everyone's lives, and had and is having and will have a considerable impact on the cultural sector. We believe that residencies are a very interesting test case where to study the impact, and also where to look for solutions on how to overcome the current challenges. Residencies are a place of production, they're a place of exchange, of creation, of contamination. They're a place of exhibition. They're a place of professional development and cultural development and human development as well. And this is why I believe what we're discussing is relevant to residency managers, to artists, to cultural practitioners, but also to a larger public as well. We are addressing issues that were present indeed before the arrival of the pandemic. Issues such as the digitalization of what we do in our life, more generally, and how we communicate and how we produce. At the same time, issue about environmental concerns, climate change, but also social injustice and institutional racism. And COVID-19, I think, exacerbated these issues and also highlighted the urgency to talk about and act upon certain aspects of our societies that must change. I won't take any further time on this. I'm really happy to introduce you to this second webinar. The question we're asking ourselves is how can we continue to exchange and to experience a residency when travel seems not to be possible at the moment because of COVID restrictions, and also which alternative formats have been tried and tested by residencies all over the world, and the implications that these formats have on cultural exchange, with a particular reference on digital and virtual experiences. Our main speaker is Jean-Baptiste Joly. Jean-Baptiste is the founding director and of Akademie Schloss Solitude, Germany's largest artist residency program located near Stuttgart. He was previously a board member of Artis and is also now an honorary board member of Artis. Jean-Baptiste is also honorary professor at the Kunsthochschule Weissensee in Berlin. And with us today, there is Iris Ferrer. Iris is a freelance cultural practitioner from the Philippines. She's also a writer, researcher, a project manager, and curator. She was managing curator for the 2018 Viva XCon, which is the longest running artist festival in the Philippines, and she has collaborated with many residencies such as Green Papaya in the Philippines and many other. And we are very happy and delighted to have both these speakers with us today.
Yes, the title was suggested by Luigi, and he just gave me a list of questions, which I give you back here about how do we continue to exchange if traveling is neither possible nor desirable. The other question was about alternative formats that had been tested by residencies all over the world, and digital experience is going to take over physical exchanges. I like those questions because somehow they are immediate consequences or reactions to the urgency of the epidemics, and it just say, so we are confronted with a situation we never had before, and how can we react? And if I think especially about the second question, alternative formats tested by residencies all over the world, I would say that I was quite interested and I found some interesting alternative formats, but I was rather looking for things and activities suggested by artists or activists all around the world, because they are our guests in our residencies, and artists and activists are the very ones who are really changing our practice. So I would rather speak, when I speak about new examples, about things that have been developed by artists and activists rather than by residencies. For me, the question we have now, beside all those questions, is really a question about hospitality. Is it still possible under the law of COVID-19? And this questions brought me back to look at possible definitions of what hospitality is. And what I don't speak about, it's the huge economic consequences that the pandemics will have on cultural activity. I know about this, but it's not my topic today, but I know that what we're talking about is just one aspect and not the main point of our questions today. Hospitality, a very ancient notion. I give you some definitions and you will see that you can take any of them, and I'm sure people looking at this and working in residencies will have the feeling that, yes, this is a definition that corresponds to my view of what hospitality is in my residency. So the first one, the most ancient, is coming from the Roman time and is speaking about somehow a contract between partners like individuals, families, or cities that are offering reciprocally hospitality. And we know, especially by residencies who are cooperating, or as artists proposing his mission statement, that if I offer hospitality, I'm expecting also hospitality for my people. Second definition is Middle Age and rather related to religion, about pilgrims, travelers, and the poor in hospitable houses. The third definition is about the notion of the foreigner who is without defense and asking for help and for hospitality. And the other one, which is also a very ancient one, is about protection granted to an exilee, to a refugee, question that is totally a question of today. And that is a very ancient definition of what hospitality is. And the last one is more general, and it's about attitude of a group of people or of somebody who is an individual, and it's about generosity of the heart, sociability, and are you ready to open your door? So the question is, how can an artist residency offer hospitality in times of COVID? And I will try to answer this. Some months ago, it was before the COVID crisis, I went through the self-descriptions of the 560 residencies on the website, and I was looking for the vocabulary they're using, and I was just counting occurrences, which was possible just making statistics and asking for keywords. And so I found that hospitality is expressed by artist members in three categories. The first one is 173 are speaking about hosting, And this notion of hosting is related to sharing, to welcoming, to the notion of guests, to the notion of friend, of respect, and of mutuality. So you find again some of the terms that were used in the original definitions. And if you look at those terms, you can also say, is it possible to share, to welcome, to respect, or to offer hospitality to guests without having them in your own place? In some points you will say, yes, it's possible. In other ones you say, no, it's not possible without really sharing the space. So I think it was quite important to look at this. And the second point is about what a team is offering in a residency, which is another way of offering hospitality. And as you see, the most used terms are nurture and foster, and exchange, and assistance, and guiding, and teaching, and advising. And I must say that all those activities are possible without sharing a physical space. It's also possible online. And the third one is the most tricky one. It's about the notion of time. We used to say, as people running residencies, that we are offering a different quality of time. And the question will find very different answers if you say, yes, it's possible to offer time to people without having them in your place, or it's only possible to offer time if you have the time you offer in your own place. So, and the words that are related to this are temporary, duration, retreat, future, hanging around, long term. And these terms, for those who are working with residencies, you all know them. And you all know that it might be possible to do it from home, but not necessarily. So the question which was given by Luigi, who was the curator of the presentation, was, how can we continue to exchange and experience a residency when travel is neither possible nor desirable? And I like this question because it's a typical question from a certain part of the world. Who is allowed to travel? If you are a Western artist coming from Northern America or from Europe, you say, yes, I'm allowed to travel and I have a passport, and yes, I can have a visa without problem. But this is a minority of artists around the world who are able to travel. So when we speak about how can we continue to exchange, we shouldn't forget that it's not everybody who was until now allowed to travel. And the second point is, who can afford the costs for a flight? And I may remember that if you buy a flight ticket from Lagos to London, back to Lagos, it will be more expensive than if you buy a ticket from London to Lagos and back to London. So there are discrepancies around price of costs, and also the price may be much higher than the annual income of an artist in other parts of the world. So, important question. As I said, traveling through the world is indeed a Western privilege. And when we speak about poor artists who are no more allowed to travel, it means poor Western artists. But the rest of the world is not a pleasure garden for Western artists, but it's a real place where people are working on the spot and not obligatory moving from one place to the other as they would like to. So, and the last point regarding flying is, what about CO2 emissions? And as you know, an important question that was not so apparent some years ago, but which is now crucial. These questions, and that's the first example from the place I was running in 2015, brought us to the creation of a virtual Akademie Schloss Solitude, taking into consideration that artists are not obligatory able or allowed to travel, and that CO2 emissions should be avoided. So we decided to open the Academy to remote artists we would never meet, which means people who wouldn't be in a position to travel under the current conditions. how can we open our space? The second one, I think, is a very important point because it's something that is also related to the notion of hospitality, which is we try to invent a new we, which means being less exclusive and less limited to the physical hosting capacity of the place, so that we can include people and guests in a we without having them necessarily in the house. And the third point, which is quite important, is if you offer a virtual program for residency, you have to include web art as a discipline for itself, because it's impossible to include an art field in the activities of a residency without questioning the medium itself. And questioning the medium itself means that you know clearly that the medium internet and web is not innocent. So you need people who are able to reflect upon this. And that's the reason why we are involving from that time many more web artists and activists. And when I say web artists and activists, there is somehow a gray zone between the activities of an artist and the engagement of activists. So there is a gray zone where, are you still an artist? Are you entering into a political field? Are you entering into a political field? Or do you have an artistic activity? So these were the reasons why we created this virtual academy 5 years ago. And I can show you, for example, here, some examples of the topics that were offered to artists around the world, every time with a curator or a juror who was suggesting a topic, like, for example, violent consumer media or engineering care or rich system, topics that are quite usual in the web world. And that's where inviting people to join and to give their results about this. And I took the second example, engineering care, just to show you that when you suggest a topic like this, then somebody will answer from an artistic point of view how we will live and work with machines and how relationships and dependencies might change, seen from 8 months ago or 10 months ago. This was somehow a more theoretical question. And this answer about engineering care became somehow a reality in the world with the COVID-19. So, and this is Late Night in Sorrento, and this is a project made by an artist who is representing terror and conflict through reenactment of terrorist acts in Moscow, and all those projects were done with a cell phone. So what we learned from these activities, and which is something that is important, that is somehow answering the question, will take online activities somehow be stronger than physical activities. We saw the permanent interaction between online and offline. It means that somebody who is suggesting an art gallery online will be joined by people who are in the spot of the academy, that people who are inviting for a performance will be at the same time online with people who are not in the place. So this permanent interaction is a new space, and this will be probably the major change in the cultural world, that you are on both sides, not either or, but always online and offline. And then, as you can imagine, the exchange between people on the spot and the ones online, especially important in terms of collective exchange of experience. Collective art are extremely influential at the moment, and offline online is an incredible space for this kind of exchange. So the answer after 5 years of experience is that indeed hospitality online is also possible. So if you consider online activities as an extension of an artist's residency, then you have to look what can you do for the time before. And the time before, it's preparing a residency with online interviews, with early common projects. And this is something that developed most all around the world. All what I have checked is really showing that the preparation of residencies now is much more precise and much more involving people so that you know them when they join the place. And also it's important because it's a potential of hope that when preparing people to a place, you make it more desirable for the people who will join the place. The second one is the time of the residency. That's the immediate experience. And this is something that is probably also the most developed at the moment with the studio visits online, webcams installed in exhibition space or in concert halls, streaming of events, video conferences, and so on. This is in between now in the last 10 months, it became somehow usual that residencies are working like this. And online residencies is something that is offered by some residencies that are saying that, well, we can't host you at the moment, but you get your fellowship nevertheless, and we're in touch with you, and you begin working on the project that we agreed about, but you do it from home, which is somehow linked to the idea I was expressing about the use of time at home or in the residency. And the last one is the time after. How do you deal with the memories of the people? I would say that's the crucial strategy in terms of alumni policy, probably the best tool you can use for developing alumni policy. It's also something about continuing activities with former fellows and involving former fellows and current fellows in a residency. Extremely important and also used, but less by residencies nowadays. So the question is, what can then place online and what cannot be done digitally? This is from the survey made by Artis last spring. So you see that about virtual residencies, people, 28% say yes, alumni connection, even more. Most is for development of new networks and contacts, and people saying no, residencies are all about in-person exchange. It's 40% of the people saying this. You could have different answers to those questions. So it's important to see that there is a feeling for what is possible or not possible, and very different from one residency to the other one. And the answer I like very much is from our colleague from DAAD in Berlin, Frau Fehlmann, saying that a meeting without an agenda is not possible. Slowly getting to know one another, even without words, not possible. Dealing with the materiality of art, literature, and music, also not possible. So there are clear limits. So when we speak about counting on online activities, is it really realistic? And I remember that 2 days ago, Iris was putting this question, and Luigi also saying, well, you know, internet access is not given worldwide on the same way. So I just digged into a wonderful website about the penetration of internet all over the world. This is the address on the top, wearesocial.com. And I just takes 3 different maps. So you see the penetration by region. In Europe, it's 95. In Northern America, it's 88%. In Southern Africa, it's 60%. And in Asia, it's 66%, and so on. Interesting to see the disparities between the different parts of the world. And then we have all those common places about, yes, but people have no access and so on. And it's more precise now. It's about, if you want to understand, then you will see that only 56% of internet users in the Asia Pacific area, but 103% of the people have a cell phone or a mobile phone, which means that 3% have 2 or 3. And if you look also for the African continent, then you will see that it's also a penetration of only 1/3 of the population, but 81% have mobile phone. I know it's 20 minutes and I just finish in 3 or 4 minutes. And if you look at this, you would say that there are low-tech solutions for local actions. And I also wanted to share with you some addresses. About mobile phones and social activism, you will find a very interesting paper by Ethan Zuckerman, who used to be a head of Department of Media Art at MIT. And he's explaining how activists and artists are using mobile phones at the moment. Same for mesh networks. As you know, you need only one internet access, and then with the mesh network, you have different routers, and you can have a network that is totally independent from the surrounding. Also extremely efficient for activists, for example, at the time of the Wall Street movement some years ago. And the same, also something we forget, but radio FM is still existing. And in regions where you have absolutely no access to internet, you have also people who are using transmitters. Quite easy to build, or easier than one would think. So and let's go to the physical reality of residencies. And so in many countries, minimal movements are possible or allowed. For this reason, you have to think local, which means you think back to artists from your city, from your country, from your continent, and you invite them to travel by train and not by plane. You take into account exiled artists living in your country, which is something also, which is a crucial point in terms of hospitality. You avoid intercontinental flights, or also, this is already done by some residencies, you set a limit of the maximum of CO2 emissions you would allow your residency to spend every year. And then you can combine the distance, the time people stay in your residency. And indeed, you involve your international network in order to think locally. And the final advice is, as you know, we are all questioning regularly the role and the place of artist residencies in our societies. And now with the COVID-19, the challenge is a different one. We have to do so. And I would say that it also helps to make the difference between routine and essentials. And somehow this has also a good side. And it's also important to mention that online activities are not a substitute to the real, but an extension of the activities of a residency in the real world. And finally, hospitality, a notion that is more necessary than ever. And for me, I was asked to speak about online activities, and I think that speaking about the notion of hospitality is the main point at the moment under the crisis situation. So thank you. I was over for 4 minutes. I hope it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste, for the presentation. And actually, in your last slide, you remind me of a quote that I kind of noted down, and actually I wanted to say it in the introduction, but I will say now. It's a quote by a curator from Tate, Cara Courage, and it's about placemaking, and I think it is really relevant also for our discussion, and I will read it now. The quote says, "We are each other's neighbors, and we are all owners of place, and any place that excludes just the one person is a failed space, and a damning reflection on us all. We are in a time of environmental, racial, and economic reckoning. It is our job as placemakers to work for a place-based climate and social justice led by the experts of that place, the communities we are in the service of. That is our opportunity now, as it ever was and should have been." And I really like this quote because I think it kind of sums up the urgency, and also the urgency that we're facing, and also the urgency of questioning of ourselves and what we do and how we do it. and how we tell the story to the others, how we tell the story of our residencies, how we tell the stories of what we do as professionals. And I would like now to bring into the conversation Iris, and I will now kind of step back, let you start the conversation, and I invite the audience to ask questions to using the Q&A function of the chat. Please do so.
Yeah, thank you for the invite to do this, Luigi, and thank you, Jean-Baptiste, for the presentation. Of course, they were really good to see the alternative methods. For instance, in 2015 in the Philippines, I did a project with planting rice for the exhibition Ethos, Pathos, Pathos, wherein we worked with anarchists and autonomous groups. And we actually did workshops to make DIY radios and mesh networks, which is similar to what you presented. And the idea of hospitality is something really ingrained in our culture. I mean, even our exported labor is mostly on the care and hospitality fields. And despite the lack of infrastructure support, spaces like Green Papaya or Sipatlawin or Comunidad X or Project Space Pilipinas all do these things that you've mentioned when it comes to hospitality. Although what I want to focus on actually is your last slide, which is that idea of hospitality being necessary more than ever. Because if we think about residencies with its primary currency as presence, how do we ensure as individuals or organizations that this presence is still going to happen? Because for most part of the world, it's not really a question of methods or formats, but more of surviving the now. I mean, I know what's happening in the Philippines, but I'm pretty sure it's in the rest of the world as well. A lot of countries are experiencing this grave situation at the moment. And I was wondering if your organization have any plans, or how do we actually rethink hospitality beyond our convenience or comforts to actually still support your stakeholders and ensure that they would be present still after either online, offline, or later on, I guess. So yeah, are there any plans in place or projects that are ongoing in your organization or Res Artis for that matter?
If it's a Res Artis question, is rather for Luigi. But what I can say to your answer is that for me, your question is triggering the notion of legal or illegal. It's for me clear that hospitality is something that can enter into an illegal field. The answer I would give to your question.
What do you mean by that?
It means that if it, for example, it's not legal to help people crossing the border between France and Italy if they are coming from the African continent. And if somebody does so, he will be sued on court and so. But if for the notion of hospitality, you do it, so you enter into a space which is an illegal space. And I would say that hospitality is stronger than legality. This is my answer.
But how does that become concrete then? I'm curious, because I'm also personally lost on how to actually enact this kind of hospitality. And if we are dedicated on being hospitable, which is the very point of residencies, how do we actually, maybe we can think together on how to actually make this happen? Because yeah, it's a matter of survival for most of us in the world.
So I'm no in charge of a residency, as you know, so I have no organization. I can just speak from the past and saying that we did some not totally legal acts by hosting people who had not the legal papers and for being in the country. That's okay, but that's the moment where hospitality is stronger than legality. We will all cross this border. as private persons, as carriers of institutions?
I guess it's just a bit hard to envision it at the moment. And I mean, beyond legality, because I do agree with you on that hospitality in general.
Mm.
But I guess, how do we make it, this notion of we that you're trying to imagine with your virtual academies, for instance, how is that going to be concrete in today's circumstance? What is this we when we can't even ensure that people, your stakeholders, are going to be still going to be there when things stabilize? So I don't know if this is too heavy for a 10 a.m. talk, but it's a point of curiosity for me, how we can actually make dents. Not that residencies can solve the world problems, of course, but you know, how do we make dents to ensure that people will still be there afterwards?
Well, if you look at our conversation now, we had one conversation on Monday and the other one today. What we are creating, speaking and exchanging together is a we. It's up to us to continue this. We are not, I would say, don't look at it from a huge perspective or about humanity, but look at in small steps, like you talking to me talking to you. We are producing a space in which we say, yes, we think that, or we disagree that. And it's all about this. It's not closing your door. It's not refusing to talk. This way is an everyday step you do.
That's true. Luigi, do you have any plans or current projects with Artis that would ensure this we that Jean-Baptiste speaks of, and that idea of hospitality as well? You are in mute.
You're indeed correct. And the point you raised, I think, is very crucial. We are talking about a survival, particularly for cultural organizations.
Yes.
And this is really what is at stake now, and doing our best and supporting organizations and guaranteeing the survival means that these organizations can offer hospitality in the future. So I think we need to work on two levels. One is crisis management. So how can we make sure that organizations survive the impact of the pandemic? And another one, which is what we are probably doing now, is kind of trying to develop and share some thoughts and context to make sure that when things will start again, we'll go back to normality, as we discussed in the previous webinar a couple of days ago, with all the issues that concerns the notion of normality. When things go back to normal, maybe we are able to act differently. And I think we should not be shy of talking about concepts and notions that go beyond what is considered acceptable or legal, indeed. And I think the cultural sector has the can do that, has the tools to do that, as a kind of I would not use the word privilege, because it's a privilege that comes at a very high price, considering the working conditions of those in the cultural sector. But I think we create connections, and also I think something that could be very useful is for us to have a better understanding of the context. So maybe because Iris and I and Jean-Baptiste had, of course, a few exchanges before the talk, and I was really kind of, in a way, even almost shocked to read the situation in the Philippines and how this is affecting communication and well-being. And again, from a kind of European perspective, this is something that we don't read about. There are other news, other priorities or not so priorities possibly. So maybe I wonder, Iris, you could give us a clear picture of the current context and how this is affecting communication exchanges in the artistic community.
it's one of the hardest questions you can throw at me because it's a daily thing. So every day there's different news happening in the Philippines. But in general, there has been deliberate silencing of critics, both activists and ordinary citizens, through creating a new law called the Anti-Terror Law. There's a lot of killings. There are disappearances of activists. There is still no plan for the pandemic. We're still on lockdown, despite all these acronyms that they throw at us. People are going hungry. There's no financial help that they're providing. There is huge corruption in the health insurance and the national health insurance, billions of money stolen from there. And they're prioritizing so many other things, which the latest one was to create a national holiday for the dictator in the 70s, 80s. So that's, I guess, what I'm carrying when I enter, well, it is what I'm carrying when I enter these kinds of conversations. Because of course, the daily is affected. And as I first mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, these alternative methods and formats are already present pre-pandemic. Of course, it's not as widespread, and it's important to be reminded of them as possible solutions. But right now, it's really how to survive on a daily basis. And these are aside from the personal experiences of the people there when I do get in contact with them. So because I am in the Netherlands and in a very much privileged position to do these talks, I am curious to how to actually concretize this idea of hospitality, because it is true, but the hope is for all of us to still be present in whatever later on or new normal or whatever you want to call this. Yeah, so it's beyond access or mobility or what other methods there can be, really. And and the thing is, I'm pretty sure it's not just the Philippines. It's a lot of other countries experiencing this as well.
We have a nice question by the audience. I can read it. By funding artists in other parts of the world in virtual residencies, it can help artists survive. And if I may answer this question, I think it's absolutely right. There are very few countries who are able to do so, but international cultural diplomacy is somehow working on this level. And these are the usual countries with a strong international cultural diplomacy. This is Germany, might be also the Netherlands, or probably also France. And they know exactly why they do this, because for example, there are countries where the German Goethe Institute is somehow maintaining a cultural life in cities, or Institut Français are maintaining a cultural life in cities and in places where beside them nothing is happening. So I think it's a part of the cultural diplomacy. But again, it sounds a little bit like imperialistic way of helping artists in other countries. I know about this taste behind, but somehow it's real. So I'm mentioning those countries, and I would invite people who are thinking about this to have a look at what their foreign cultural institutes are offering in their cities or in their country.
I agree with that. I know some friends who actually have been surviving on virtual residencies, and the funding that this provides for them, it adds to how they would actually survive the daily these days. So it's a very important thing. And I think that's one of the concrete ways as organizations have more of a capacity, even though I'm sure there are also struggles as organizations. But offering all these ways of actually creating semblance of sanity, or still being able to feel like you're still an artist or a cultural practitioner within these crazy times, I think is very important as well. And I think that connects to your notion of time, Jean-Baptiste, that you mentioned. Yes. In a not really the usual way, but it does offer some semblance of headspace.
Yes.
In the midst of this, like being stuck with your families for months and months. And yeah, I think that's very important for sanity.
Which I think is important is having a duty, having a task, having a commission, is structuring your time even at home. So that's why I think that it's possible to speak about a remote residency in your own place if you are given a task and the possibility of doing it. So it means that you dedicate your time and you are entering the space of work, which is quite known now by sociology when you look about home office rules, you know, when you are working at home. So that's exactly the same. So this notion of time is comparable to this notion of you have a commitment, you have a commission, you have to work on this, you have a time frame, and it structures also the view you have on your own place.
But I would also suggest to organizations who offer these virtual residency trips, which I've said that it is important to somehow adjust as well, because for instance, some homes don't have a space to actually create all these commissions. So it's also, or even the time, because there is a certain rhythm, there's certain things that needs to be answered immediately rather than work. So there is an adjustment, a certain discomfort, I would say, that is required in how we actually think of hospitality from an organizational point of view.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have a question for both of you, because we are kind of addressing the topic from an organizational point of view, how to best host someone else. But my concern is, what are the expectations from an organizational point of view? So I have the impression sometimes that organizations give hospitality, but then they expect quite a lot in return of hospitality. And how, in terms of artist presence, artist production, artist commitment, how can we kind of address this kind of potential imbalance? So give hospitality, but we need to do this and that, particularly in a situation or in the current situation. So there is a note in the chat from Caroline saying that only 17% of the artists that we surveyed were able to access funding, which means that basically under COVID, artists had probably close to no income because galleries were closed, performances were cancelled, freelance jobs were mostly stopped. So how are there kind of any rules? Is there an etiquette for organizations to be hospitable without demanding probably as much or even more than what they're giving to artists?
I would say maybe think about it as an investment. I mean, it's a relational thing. When you think of stakeholders, I would like to think it should be relational. When you connect to these people, it shouldn't just be a transactional thing of what I give to you and then you give to me. And if I give to you 10 coins, you give me 10 coins in return. So it's understanding that these people are struggling more than you, and you have more of a capacity, and it's a long-term investment, I would say. So maybe there should be some softening of these rules. I mean, if Jean-Baptiste is willing to be a bit illegal, I think this crisis should allow certain leeways there. But it's thinking of that. I mean, that some things aren't really, can be really, you know, stuck in numbers or what can be actually returned, but later on, you know.
I like the question because Luigi, you give the impression this question will appear for the first time, but the artist as a dancing beer invited by residencies in order to be exploited by the residency is a very old question, as old as artist residencies themselves. So just the fact that now, under the new conditions of COVID, this question is even more rude or even more brutal than it used to be, because residencies have less funding and artists have less access to work and money. So it's exactly the same question as it used to be, but under the new conditions of COVID. And I would say that's the part we don't speak about, which is the catastrophic economic consequences of COVID on cultural institutions and on the life of artists in general, who are in general, as we all know, living under the level of precariousness. And this will be even stronger and much more difficult in the past. That's the reason why you buy art, you give money to institutions who are supporting artists. That's you are part of this we, I would say. But there is no answer to this. This is a fact, and there is no way of offering a solution.
Or, I mean, I guess it's also, being honest as organizations, no? Being transparent with this fragility and allowing a certain help on both ends. Because although most cultural practitioners are on that point of survival, there still can be offered. It's a certain trust that should be made there. Mm-hmm. Hence the idea of a long-term relational investment, I would say, is very important. That whole mindset, because we're all affected, is the reality of things.
Yes.
Is the expansion of digital residency and opportunities going to kind of readdress this imbalance, if there is an imbalance? So is the digitalization of residencies, which was happening anyway, but as of course exacerbated now, is it going to have, is it going to support artists, or is it going to make their life more difficult? And same questions for organizations.
It's somehow a cynical question you're putting. What would you answer to your own question? I know we trap you with your own trap.
Oh gosh. It depends. It depends would be my honest answer. I think that, of course, going online makes opportunities potentially more accessible, but like an online residency shouldn't be a second-class residency. So if you run an online residency program, the commitment towards it should be as much as the commitment into physical residency, if not more, because there's still like a learning curve ahead in terms of what can be done online technically, and also gain from a relational point of view. So I think, yes, online is a huge opportunity, because we give an opportunity for those who cannot travel, regardless of the reason, to have a residence experience, to experience hospitality. But there is a big need for investment. We need, I think residencies need resources themselves. to learn how to host virtually successfully. It's not just the technological platforms, so having a paid subscription to Zoom and a Mac and a broadband connection. You could do low tech, but then it's an option that again shouldn't be like a second class offer. It should be within a framework that valorizes low tech, for instance. And there is a lot of investment needs to be done in terms of the kind of theoretical framework. We are working online. It is different. It is different how we communicate, how we exchange. I think there is a huge learning process. So I would say kind of great opportunities, but a lot of work needs to be done on the side of the organizations, also probably on the side of visiting artists. And I think this is where large cultural institutions should come to help, should support this development, because COVID has only exacerbated this tendency. And now we are in. We can't say no, we don't do online because we don't like it. Most of us have to kind of play this game, and I think it's an interesting game to play that can change some things in the sector, but we kind of need reciprocal support and help.
There is a nice question coming from the audience about what did you learn as an artist residency from the practice or the situation of artists abroad that you could integrate in the activities of your residency program, which I think is important. It's about the mutual influence of the artists on the residency. And I could give an example. For example, we were offering to fellows some project budget for the time in the residency, and seeing the gap between the conditions of life in the residency and the conditions of life in the country of the artists who joined the place. We decided some years ago that part of the budget could be spent also after the residency when the artists are going home, for example, and before leaving they would buy a camera, a video camera, or a new computer in order to just continue experiencing the advantages of the residency beyond the time of the residency. This question of the gap between the conditions of life in Europe and the conditions of life abroad in your own country was for us a crucial point. So how to avoid that artists are falling back into the difficult economic situation they experienced before, as an example.
I think that's a very good, actually concrete way of doing hospitality that goes beyond the residency moment, or that actually, like I said, like it's seen as a long-term investment because it is a relationship that is being formed. And in connection to what you said, Luigi, it's also, I guess, rethinking as organizations what the values are, because this hierarchy of low tech or digital being second class shouldn't even be there if your primary concern is the presence of these people, is the exchanges that are being created, whether it be online or on-site for some who are able. So yeah, I think there's a lot of adjustments to be done, but that's a very good example, Jean-Baptiste, and I'm glad to hear that those are actually in place. Makes me hopeful.
I'm very glad that we shifted the conversation from online residencies to the crucial notion of hospitality. And I'm glad you both followed me on this point, Iris, and if I may say it at the end of this webinar. Thank you for following me.
It was a very interesting thing to talk about as well.
Thanks a lot to both. I'm aware of time. I thank the audience. I thank the audience for the questions. Very engaging. Thanks for being here until the very end. A huge thank you to Iris and Jean-Baptiste for their time and passion and experience and commitment. Much appreciated. It's been a great pleasure to have you here with us.